All right, hi. We're going to do 3 chapters today of Ban This Book because they're all pretty short, so that should work out. All right, we left off on the Golden Hoard. Okay. I sat on my bed surrounded by books. I stacked them by size, then stacked them alphabetically, then stacked them by books I'd read and books I hadn't read. I loved the weight of them, the feel of them, especially the hardback books with the clear plastic coating that crinkled and crackled as you opened the book. Some of them were old, older even than I was. Some of them were brand new. And all of them had been banned. It was a treasure trove, these stacks, and suddenly I had the idea that I was Smaug the dragon sitting on my piles of gold and jewels, and I would do anything to keep that hobbit and those dwarves from taking them back. It's a Lord of the Rings reference if you didn't catch on. How had I not seen books as treasure before? I loved books. I couldn't imagine living without them, but I had never seen each book as such a valuable thing before. Even the books I wasn't interested in reading were like gold. It didn't matter what was inside them. One man's junk was another man's treasure, as my grandmother said. The same thing was true with books. One person's Captain Underpants was another person's from the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. I didn't have time to sit around thinking about it for too long. The house was quiet, beautifully, unbelievably quiet, but it wouldn't last. Mom was in the kitchen on her laptop. Angelina was at Gymboree running around like a racehorse, and Alexis was at ballet. In an hour, Dad would bring them home, and it would be chaos again. Even the dogs were quiet, curled up, and sacked out on Alexis's bed. For the next few minutes, my world was all mine, and I had work to do. Work I didn't want anyone else to see me doing. Some of the books were new enough that they needed card slots pasted into the back. Some of them already had envelopes, and all I had to do was take out the old Shelbourne Elementary Library due date card and replace it with one of mine. The old cards were fun to look at. I loved the typewriter font at the top, listing the title and author, and the long lists of scribbled signatures with red due dates stamped beside them. Sometimes you'd see the first name Sometimes you'd see the same name over and over again. I imagined what the card from the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler would look like if they still checked books out like this today. My name would be in every slot and onto the back by now. One girl had checked out Harriet the Spy 3 times. I saw her name again on the Matilda card. If I had gone to Shelbourne Elementary in 1985, she and I might have been friends. I pulled the card out of the next book and skimmed down it, looking for a familiar name. And then I saw one. A very familiar name. Was it? No. Could it? No, it couldn't be. But the more I stared at it, the more I thought, it has to be. That card was a keeper. All right, this chapter is Princesses 1 through 9. Jeffrey Gonzalez was back from his suspension. He sat in his seat in our classrooms, arms folded, staring at his empty desk. Everybody else stayed clear of him, but I went up to him before class. "Hey," I said, "I'm sorry you got suspended." Jeffrey shrugged. "Whatever. I didn't know if you did it for us or..." Jeffrey frowned. "What?" "You know," I lowered my voice, "because Coltrane dropped that book in the cafeteria. Principal Banazuski was about to pick it up when you..." "I didn't do it for you," Jeffrey said bitterly. "I didn't do it for anybody. He was in my seat." "Okay," I said. "Well, anyway, thanks. Live long and prosper." Live long and prosper was a thing Jeffrey liked to tell people. It was from Star Wars or something. Star Trek, but close. "Yeah," he said. "Right." I left Jeffrey under his little black cloud. What was wrong with him? Usually he was drawing spaceships all over his notebook or using the Force to try and make the papier-mâché planets that hung from the ceiling spin backward. Now he was just angry all the time. "All right, everybody, language arts time," Mr. Vaughn said. "It's free reading Friday, so get out whatever you brought to read. I'm going to do the same." Free Reading Friday was my all-time favorite thing about Mr. Vaughn's class. Every Friday for language arts, we all got to sit around the room and read anything we wanted to. as long as it wasn't a book for school. Even Mr. Vaughn read. He'd been reading an Agatha Christie mystery called Murder on the Orient Express. I pulled out The Mysterious Benedict Society and the Prisoner's Dilemma and opened it to my bookmark. I was just starting the part where the Mysterious Benedict Society falls into a trap when I heard Mr. Vaughn ask someone across the room, "The 17th Princess? What's that about?" I looked up with a squeak. Danny and Rebecca were gawking too. The 17th Princess was one of our fake covers. Someone was reading one of the BBLL books in class, and Mr. Vaughn had caught her. It was Lacey Edwards. Lacey was the tallest girl in 4th grade. She looked up at me in horror. The book wasn't about 17 princesses, of course. Inside, it was, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret." I gave her a look that said, "Make something up." Lacey had to look at the cover again to see what the title was. "It's about the 17th princess," she said. Mr. Vaughn laughed. "Well, I gathered that. What happened to the first 16? "Well, the first one fell into a pot of boiling oil," Lacey said. "Ouch," Mr. Vaughn said. "The second one ate a poisoned apple." "Always a classic," said Mr. Vaughn. "The third one got sat on by a giant." Some of the kids around Lacey laughed. People were starting to pay attention to her. "The fourth one turned into a werewolf. The fifth one was eaten by a giant shark. The sixth one choked on her own snot." "Ew," the class said, half laughing and half gagging. I sucked on a braid. Why in the world did we have to make it 17 princesses? "The 7th princess got kicked in the face with a soccer ball," Lacey said. She was really getting into it now. "The 8th princess, she stuck her tongue in an electrical socket." The other kids cheered for that one. Mr. Vaughn looked around at them, amused and concerned at the same time. "The 9th princess accidentally sat on her crown," Lacey said. "The 10th princess..." All right, Mr. Vaughn said. "I'm afraid if we go all the way to 17, language arts will be over before anyone's done any reading." He shook his head. "That's a strange book you've got there, but it sounds fun." Mr. Vaughn left Lacey's desk to go sit in the big chair at the front of the room and read his book, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I saw Danny and Rebecca do the same thing. That had been a close one. I guess we should be lucky the cover hadn't been "Smell My Finger." I was about to go back to my book when I saw one other person looking across the room at me. Trey McBride. He glanced over at Lacey, then back at me, then disappeared behind an Amulet graphic novel. Okay. Last chapter today. New customers. At lunch, Jeffrey sat by himself. He'd had friends before, other kids who liked talking about the same kinds of movies and shows he did. But no one wanted to sit with him now. Jeffrey seemed to want it that way. He picked fights with anybody who hung out with him too long. I stared across the room at Space Cadet Jeff, feeling sorry for him. He'd always been a nice guy before. He'd been like this for a while now. Ever since that day we both got called to the office. He wasn't angry before that. What had Principal Baniszewski been telling him as they came out of her office? Something about how she was sure his grandmother had been a nice person. Jeffrey's grandmother must have died. Was that why he was so mad? I could understand him being sad, but why was he so angry all the time? Then I remembered the books I'd read where people die. Sometimes the characters refused to believe it. Sometimes they just got to where they shut down and didn't want to do anything. And sometimes they got really mad. I had a book like that in my locker, in fact. After lunch, I wrote a note that said I wanted to talk and left it in Jeffrey's locker mailbox. He met me at my locker after school with the note in his hand. "What?" he said. "Hey, Jeffrey," I said. "I didn't know where to start. I know your grandmother died." Jeffrey looked away, staring at the lockers. "So?" he said. "I just wanted you to know that I know what you're going through," I said. His eyes flashed to mine, and I saw the Jeffrey who'd gotten suspended for fighting. "Oh yeah," he said. "Did your grandmother die?" "No," I said. "Then you don't know," he said. "But I've read about it," I said. "In a book." Jeffrey snorted and looked away. I opened my locker and showed him the book. Mr. Bear opens a bank account, he said. Oh, no. That's just the fake cover we put on it to fool the teachers. I opened it up to show him. It's called Bridge to Terabithia. I think you should read it. Jeffrey looked at the book in my hands, but didn't take it. It sounds stupid, Jeffrey said. It's not. It's really good, I told him. It's about these two kids who invent this pretend kingdom and become the king and queen. I think you'll really like it. I held the book out to Jeffrey, and he finally took it. I'll maybe read it, he said. Okay, I said. I hoped he would. Jeffrey walked away, and I turned. Trey McBride was standing right behind me. I jumped out of my skin, then remembered to slam my locker shut and slip on the lock. Hey, Trey said. Hey, I said back. I tried not to sound nervous, even though I was. Every time I turned around, there he was. He stood there for a few seconds, just looking at me, but not saying anything. What did he want? Our First Amendment project was already finished. I want to borrow a book, Trey said. What? I swallowed. Hard. The school library is right down the hall, I told him. I want to borrow a book from you, from your locker. I don't know what I want to borrow Captain Underpants, he told me. I know you have it. Trey flipped up the Go Eagles #1 sign on my locker and pointed to the list of banned books on the back. The green dots mean you have them, right? I want to read this one. My own little patch of quicksand was opening up underneath me again. Trey knew all about the BBLL. Did that mean his mom knew too? Maybe she did. Maybe Trey had figured it out and told his mom, but instead of going right to the principal, she'd sent him here to check out a book as evidence. I shook my head. I was beginning to think like Rebecca. No, you don't have it, or no, you won't let me check it out, Trey said. He'd taken my head shake for a no. I didn't know what to tell him. If I gave him the book and he took it to his mom, it was all over, and I was in big trouble. But what if Trey really just wanted to read the book? Didn't all this start when he checked out Captain Underpants from the school library to read it? I'd gotten to know Trey working together on our First Amendment project, and I'd started to like him, despite him drawing me as a mouse in 3rd grade. And it was Trey's mom who banned the books, not Trey. Maybe he didn't agree with her at all. Maybe he just really wanted to read Captain Underpants. And that's why I had the banned books locker library to begin with, wasn't it? So anybody who wanted to could read the books banned from the school library? Trey looked disappointed in me and turned to leave. Wait, I said. I do have one, and you can borrow it. I was saying all kinds of crazy things out loud these days. I spun the dial on my lock, yanked it open, and got out Captain Underpants. Trey's eyes lit up. Do you have the 4th one? Captain Underpants and the Perilous Plot of Professor Poopy Pants? I did. Okay, we'll stop there. And then the chapter for tomorrow that we'll start with is called My Biggest Mistake. See what that's about. Okay, bye.